Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. For your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is that we have decided to talk about. This evening we're going to talk about economic justice in America. And we'll be talking about economic justice in Oregon and Washington area, the northwest of the US of A. But we're talking about what's going on in this country across the board too. So my guest this evening, or Jeff Strang, is a fellow humanist, and he walks the talk of humanism, and I'll tell you more about that later on if it's necessary. I admire this man. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Don.
And Tom Gehring, did I pronounce that properly?
That's correct.
And you're a friend of Jeff's?
We're associates and friends.
Associates, yeah. Good to have you. I'm kind of nervous. Are you nervous now?
Not yet, unless you make me nervous.
I'm leaving now. How you feeling, Jeff?
Hi, Don. Good.
Good, good. So, as you know, the show goes in two major segments. The first half is, approximate half is, I'll talk to you about who you are personally, so the viewers get an idea where you're coming from when you talk about the subject of the show, economic justice, and they see kind of an idea why you have the views that you do. And then the second half is we talk about the subject of the show, economic justice, and common ground. Common ground is going to be a big thing we'll be talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, we're both from the organization Common Ground, so we have that in common, and we'll talk about that.
All right. So let's start with you, Jeff. You've been on before, but people are going to be seeing this show who haven't seen you before. So we probably won't go as long as we do about who you are personally, but you sort of set the model for Tom here about the kind of questions I'll be asking. And when I ask a question and you don't want to answer it, you just say, I don't want to answer it. Or you can tell me to get lost or something.
Mm-hmm.
But usually I don't offend anybody with the questions I ask. And your name is Jeff Strang. Is that your whole name?
That's right, Jeffrey Albert Strang.
Jeffrey Albert Strang. Where'd you get that Albert from?
From my paternal grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
My father's father was named Albert Strang, and he was lived in New Jersey, southern New Jersey mostly, grew up on a farm, and then moved to the town of Vineland, New Jersey, and became a bank teller and worked his way up to the president of the local bank.
Climbed the ladder, huh?
Climbed the ladder, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
From the farm to the town.
Okay. And when and where were you born?
In that very same town, Vineland, New Jersey.
Vineland, New Jersey. And how long have you been here?
I've been in Oregon over 30 years,
30
since 1983.
83.
Mm-hmm.
30 years.
Yeah, so over half my life has been here in Oregon.
Okay. Why were you born?
Why was I born? Well, my parents hooked up, and my father was surprised that they were able to have children because he had gotten testicular cancer in the Second World War. And he thought it was because of the bouncing up and down on the troop transport trucks.
Yeah, 6-bys.
But he got testicular cancer and thought he could never have children, but he was able to have 3. Maybe they were able to have more, but they didn't have more than 3. They just had 3, and so I was the first.
That's a story, isn't it?
Yep.
Did you ever mop your brow? It's a close call. Anything significant about your cultural or national heritage? Or are you just plain American white bread?
Yeah, kind of white bread, American. My only interesting ancestor that I knew who was from another country, was my mother's father. He was originally from Italy. And they came over in the late 19th century on a ship from Italy. So I only knew him for a couple of years. I still remember him, but I was 3 or 4 when he died.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he was in the cigar business at one time. He
Cigar business.
importing cigars, yeah, and would go to New York a lot and sell his cigars.
And the other 2 kids in the family, a boy and a girl?
A boy and a girl, yeah. My brother lives in the Washington, D.C. area, and my sister lives in Iowa.
And what do they do?
My brother works for the U.S. Treasury Department. He's an economist. And my sister works at a nature center, a nonprofit nature center.
Mm-hmm. And what do you do for a living nowadays?
I work as an environmental health specialist at Multnomah County. And most of my colleagues are restaurant inspectors and hotel and motel inspectors, pool inspectors. They make sure the restaurants are keeping things clean, so there's no problem with diseases being passed on to us that eat at restaurants. And
Is that any connection with the CIA?
not that I know of.
Don't be sure.
And I'm a little unusual in that I work mainly on housing issues.
Uh-huh.
So I do housing issues with the asthma program, with the lead program. I do investigations when a child has elevated blood lead level. Then I see where they're getting the lead from. And usually it's old paint.
Interesting.
And I also work in schools, make sure the schools have healthy indoor air.
How'd you happen to get that job?
Well, I had worked in construction, residential construction, for quite a long time. I was a residential repair and remodeling contractor in the 90s and early 2000s. Then I got a job at the City of Portland as a housing inspector, enforcing the housing maintenance code, property maintenance code.
Do you have a contractor's license?
I do now, yes, and I did back then.
See, I didn't
And
know that.
in 2009, I was laid off by the City of Portland with the downturn in the economy, and then I became a home inspector. So I'm a self-employed contractor now as a home inspector.
Uh-huh.
And back in the 90s, I was a self-employed contractor doing residential construction.
And that paid the bills?
And that paid the bills. And then about 10 months after I was laid off, I was hired by Multnomah County. So I'm still able to do my home inspection business a little bit on the weekends,
Yeah.
in case you need a home inspection.
Yeah. And how does what you're doing now fit in with your formal education?
Well, I needed a biology degree to become an environmental health specialist, and I have that from Iowa State University. And I also have a math and international studies degree, and the international studies might have helped me with learning some Spanish, so I do some of my investigations, home inspections in Spanish. And the math, I guess I can keep track of numbers. like radon. I do radon testing, for example, in the schools. I've got a little device that measures the radon every hour, so I can help improve the ventilation system to exhaust the radon so it doesn't build up and the people breathe it on a regular basis.
If you would choose another profession at this time in your life, would you stay with what you're doing now, or would you do something different?
I would stay with what I'm doing now. I really like the home inspection business, and with the county, I get to do a fair amount of that. And the schools is part of that too.
Okay. And do you have a partner?
I have a partner. Yep, her name is Tamara Boyd,
Yes.
and she's a really great partner, and we've had an interesting project for the last 10 years. We took in a girl of 10 years old, and it was through the Humanist organization, in fact.
Humanists of Greater Portland.
Humanists of Greater Portland, and her mom had to give her up because her mother was too sick, and so Tamara and I took her in, and now she's 20.
That's commendable. How is she doing now?
Well, she's doing all right. She's at our house now. She helped cook spaghetti and meatballs tonight.
Was it good?
It was good. Yeah, yeah, she's becoming a good cook.
Yeah. Where's your mom and dad?
My father has passed on. That's been about 5 years, 6 years. And my mother still lives in Iowa. And we visited her last fall.
How old is she now?
She is 84.
84.
Sorry, 83. She'll be 84 next month.
Yeah. And your political persuasion, are you a Tea Party or a right-winger or a Fox broadcast aficionado or what?
Well, in fact, I'm a member of the Pacific Green Party here in Oregon.
Is that one of them communist parties?
Well, the socialists and the Greens merged maybe 15 years ago or so. So there's definitely a red streak in the Green organization.
I like that. A red streak. Memberships in political, social, or civic organizations other than the Humanists of Greater Portland that the viewers might be curious about. Where do you belong to?
Oh, goodness. Well, I'm fairly active in the neighborhood association and in the little nonprofit community garden that we've got there. It's part of the Oregon Sustainable Agriculture Land Trust. It's a double lot donated by a woman who happened to get an inheritance, and she bought the double lot in the early 90s, and it was the first property in the Oregon Sustainable Agriculture Land Trust system. And then a few years ago, we started a community orchard also. So we have an orchard with some fruit trees growing and fruit bushes, and so we're hoping when they get to be mature, that'll produce a good amount of fruit, and we can share half of it with food banks, and volunteers keep the other half.
You are a do-gooder, aren't you?
Yes.
You're next. Don't laugh.
Can't
Well,
compete with that.
I recognize that I've been fortunate to have been born and to have grown up in a good situation, and so I just try to pass that on.
And you do it in spades. You do it wonderfully.
Thank you, Don.
You betcha. Persons from the past or alive today that you particularly admire or admired. Name one or two.
Well, I really appreciate Jared Diamond's books. I've really gotten a lot out of those. Guns, Germs, and Steel, Collapse, The World Before Yesterday. Excellent books, I think.
What are his books about generally?
About the evolution of human cultures, starting with agriculture in Guns, Germs, and Steel. It was answering the question of why Europeans tended to have a lot more stuff, and people in tribal societies, for example, in Papua New Guinea, tend not to have much. So it talks about where agriculture started and animal husbandry, and all the evolution of human movements, and it's just fascinating.
So, because of what he was about, what he writes about, is memorable to you right now.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Shall we leave you now and go over here to Tom?
Feel free.
You ready?
All right.
Okay. Am I scaring you yet?
No, Not yet.
Just hold on.
Just wait till those questions.
And your full name, Tom?
Thomas Arnold Gearing.
Thomas Arnold Gearing. Anything significant about that name?
Well, can you guess the ethnicity?
Ach. You're a Kraut?
That's true.
My mother was a Heiser from Hamburg.
Really?
Yes, I'm from New Orleans. That's why I look the way that I do.
Okay, now I think part of my mother's side is from that Hamburg area, and my father's side is from southern Germany, the around Stuttgart.
Stuttgart.
So that means I'm 100% German.
Son of a gun, you're weird. Nobody's 100% anymore.
As far as I know.
And when and where were you born?
I was born in St. Louis
St. Louis?
in 1940.
40. You got a couple of years on you.
Yeah,
Yeah?
they're creeping up.
Yeah. Why were you born?
Why was I born?
Why does everybody always repeat the question? I asked you first.
Yes, because that is a strange question. You have to ask my parents about that.
Okay.
They met on a trip in Germany, to Germany, from St. Louis. It was a group of church people that went to Germany in 1938. If you can imagine. Germany in 1938.
Oh my gosh.
But they
Strange
were
love.
on a Lutheran land tour because our family is all Lutheran. So they're, Missouri Synod, and they went on this trip, and that's where they met and got married. And soon afterwards, I was there. I was the first one of 5.
Do you remember what was going on when you were born?
Yes.
Tell me.
I don't remember the time, but I can connect the dots. It was the Blitz over London.
Yes.
In August 1940.
Do you have any memories of what was going on at that time in your childhood?
Very early memories are at my grandfather's house. We would visit their house, and he had subscribed to the Illustrated London News, which, if you've ever seen it, it's a pictorial news magazine,
Sure.
black and white or sepia. And at that time, there were just page after page of war stories. So this must have been late in the war, and about the battles in the Pacific Islands and what have you.
Yeah.
But those are just, flash memories, nothing comprehensive.
Okay. And Lutheran, are you practicing Lutheran today?
I am not.
What are you?
I've gone beyond. I've become much too liberal for Missouri Synod Lutheranism, I'm afraid.
Do you have one word you can characterize your belief system? I don't want to say labels, because labels.
Well, if you want to put a label on it,
I don't want to.
you could.
You can.
I'll put one on for you.
Sure.
I could say, in a way, Buddhist Christian.
Wow, interesting. I never heard that term before. Buddhist Christian.
It's a term that's becoming more and more common in North America because of the Buddhist influence in spirituality. There is, particularly among Catholics, I understand, there's quite a bit of an outreach towards Eastern philosophy and religion as a means of understanding our own Christian religion and a way of introducing a practice which is much more beneficial to spiritual life.
Buddhist Christian. You're nodding your head over there. I didn't ask you your early religious preference.
Well, I've always been a skeptic.
Always?
So, yeah. And eventually I took a position that there is no God or supernatural, so I'm an atheist now and a secular humanist.
Wow. Okay. And
So you were shaking your head. You weren't nodding your head.
Oh, I was nodding my head because I understand that there's Buddhist influences coming into Christianity.
Yeah.
Yes. I think it began with Thomas Merton.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's gone quite far now. Look at the number of sanghas, or you would call monasteries, even in the Portland area. Quite a big following here.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's not that I'm Buddhist. It's not that, but I'm understanding Christianity through the eyes of Buddhism to some extent, and it makes a lot of sense. And others have too. I mean, there are other Christian writers, scholars who are seeing it that way.
Yeah. I was Roman Catholic, conservative, rosaries. I was an altar boy for years. And it didn't take long for me to find out how crazy some of their thinking was, but I was nothing for a long time. And then I joined the Unitarian Church for a while, and finally ended up, so to speak, saying, hey, I think I must be a humanist. I'm certainly an agnostic and an atheist, not an atheist, which is a pejorative. And I've lately I dug out my meditation for dummies to review what I learned years ago, because I gave up meditation a long time ago, talking about the Buddhist influence. And this book is so comprehensive, it's for dummies, until I'm finding what you're talking about, the kinds of meditation to do with Buddhism and that kind of philosophy and thinking. And I'm just getting back into it as I'm older now and am able now to grasp what it's about and the kind of thing you're talking about. And as you talk about it, there's a look about your face that says more than the words you're saying.
Well, sure. I think the essence is that Christian religion has taken the Bible and its stories literally, which is a big problem because it doesn't really make any sense. And I don't believe that the Gospels are or ever written to be read in a literal sense. And if you read other literature from other religions, like Buddhism, you'll see that these are allegorical. They are symbolic. And that Christianity, or that Judaism was reinterpreted through Jesus' followers in a way that reflected meanings from the early Torah and projected them forward to give attributes to Jesus that were applicable to Moses and Elijah and many others. And they used this as, they call it midrash. They used that technique to describe Jesus, because no one writing about Jesus 80 years later would have known what he said at all.
Yeah.
So they used that technique to describe in narrative form what Jesus would have taught, or what he did teach, I mean, his understanding.
Like religions have the Bible and the Torah and all those kinds of things in books. What do you have in your life to refer to as a source of inspiration?
Well, I do have many sources, many sources. I read, of course, I read biblical sources. I read some of the Buddhist literature as well.
Do you meditate nowadays?
Yeah, I meditate every morning.
Oh, I knew there was something else wrong with you. I could tell. Wonderful. Yeah, you're just as
Well, it's not, you know, I don't think of it as good or bad. I think of it as just a way to start the day and start with a calm and collected feeling before starting the day. That's after yoga, by the way.
Yeah, he's got me. I love it. I'm glad you brought him. Yeah. So let's continue on,
Okay.
so we have time to talk
Sure.
about your subject. What'd you do for, do you still work anymore?
I'm retired now. I work for these guys. I work with these guys.
What'd you do before you retired?
Oh, I am a professional urban planner. So I've had a mixed career of working in planning agencies. I came to Portland in 1979, worked to work with PSU Urban Studies. I was a assistant professor at PSU for 5 years.
Okay. What's your formal education?
Urban planning, all the way through. At
Which level did you go?
At Michigan State, University of Wisconsin, and then Ahmadu Bello University, Northern Nigeria, for a PhD.
Son of a gun. Where'd you find this guy? Thank you for coming. Children, grandchildren.
Yes, I do have 2 boys.
Do you have a wife?
I have a wife. She was born in Hong Kong and is a naturalized citizen. She just returned from Hong Kong 2 days ago for a family visit.
She came back to you, huh?
Yeah, she did come back. And yeah, 2 just great boys. And they found just wonderful ladies to marry too, and they've got beautiful children. I have 4 beautiful grandchildren.
Terrific, terrific. How would you characterize your political persuasion? Are you left, right, or center, or what?
Well,
Mostly.
in American terms, I'm probably left. In universal terms, probably center.
All right. And memberships in the political, social, or civic organizations? You belong to any of things like that that the viewers would find interesting?
I used to belong to the American Planning Association. I'm retired now, so I don't keep that active. No, I actually don't belong to other associations now, other than Common Ground.
Persons from the past or alive today that you particularly look up to or admire. Any names come to mind?
Well, of course, family members, my grandmother in particular.
Your grandmother?
Yeah.
Why? Why her?
Oh, she was just a wonderful human being, so generous. She did the best cooking ever, German style. And she just welcomed everyone into her house. She has a lot of good sense of humor. And she was just fun to be around.
Did she ever hug you?
Oh, yeah.
You ever died? So I'm looking at the clock, and we better take a break now so we can have some time to talk about Common Ground and other stuff.
Okay.
Can we take a break, Mr. Director? So the mic's going to be off for a couple minutes. Okay. Okay. Okay, we're back. Thanks for staying tuned. And for you viewers who missed the opening of the show, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people, like most of you out there, about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals, and about what we're going to talk about the second half of the show, Common Ground and other stuff like that too. And my 2 guests this evening are particularly interesting. I hope you find them as interesting as I have. Even though Jeff has been on the show before, I'm still learning more about you as time goes by. Are we getting wiser or what, Jeff?
The more time together, the more we find out about each other.
Yeah, and you're an absolute delight. So I got a couple prompting questions from you, and we'll take it from there. Let's start off with your organization that you'll be talking about is called Common Ground. Can you tell me a little about what you work on with Common Ground? What is Common Ground?
Well, Common Ground is a national organization that promotes taxation of land over taxation of capital and wages. So we focus on the land aspect of things. Land value taxation is a term that's often used. And the history is interesting. Back in colonial times, Thomas Paine promoted a land tax system in order to fund Social Security. And
But let me interrupt you for a moment. We nowadays in this country, do we tax land or people or both?
we tax both.
So, okay. I won't interrupt you anymore.
So in the 19th century, in the late 19th century, Henry George was a major proponent of land value taxation, and he was mayor of New York at one point.
He ran for mayor.
Or ran
He
for
didn't quite
mayor of
make
New
it.
York.
Yeah.
And he promoted this idea of taxing land sufficiently in order to pay for government functions,
Uh-huh.
and not taxing some of the things we want to see, which is people earning money and people being productive. So that's kind of the general historic view. And in the current times, Common Ground USA is the main organization in the United States that promotes this. And there's also a Henry George School.
How would it be different than it is today if we were to implement the ideas in Common Ground? We would just tax land, the value of land, and not people who live on the land?
Do you want to
Yes,
talk
well,
about that?
land value taxation is actually practiced in some parts of the world. In our country, Pennsylvania is the one state that adopted the land value tax, and that was in 1911 by a Republican reform effort in that state. Other countries, particularly those associated with the Commonwealth, have forms of land value taxation. Australia, New Zealand, some countries in Europe. Denmark has some form of land value taxation. Hong Kong and Singapore and Taiwan are good examples of where it's been applied on a wide-scale basis.
Oh.
And the revenues that are produced from that are adequate to fund a very high level of local government services.
So the citizens in those communities are not taxed to pay for the services and maintaining the infrastructure.
Largely, the tax is from land in some countries. Hong Kong would be an example. They still have other taxes, particularly a VAT tax, which is a form of a value-added tax.
Yeah.
Yeah, sales tax.
Now, how would it be I live in Beaverton, which is a suburb of Portland, and let's say my property taxes are at $3,500. If you had Common Ground ideas going here, would I still pay the same amount of property taxes, and how would it affect my tax situation as a citizen?
That is could be a long and lengthy, complicated answer to that question. I don't know your particular circumstances, but here's basically the way it would work.
Please.
Our, as you know, our property tax system has two components that are assessed in their value. One is the land, and the other is improvements. If you look at your
Yes.
property tax bill, you see it broken down
Yes.
into those two things. Well, they are separated because they are very different things. So what you do with a land value tax is you, instead of taxing both land and improvement assessments at the same rate together, you separate them out, tax the land at a higher rate than the building assessment at a lower rate. It's called a split rate tax,
Okay.
which is the most common form of a land value tax. In other words, it's not 100% tax on land and no tax on buildings. That tax actually hasn't been applied. It never has.
Why would that be superior to what we have going on now?
Well, it's because of the incentives. You see, a tax is not just a way to raise revenue. A tax is also a means of providing incentives. So you incentivize what is publicly beneficial. That is what Jeff was talking about before. We have three factors of production, as you know: land, labor, and capital.
Okay.
Labor and capital are taxed, but they really shouldn't be taxed very high because they are both beneficial to society. Labor produces wages. You tax wages, you get less labor and less wages, because a tax tends to diminish the base on which it is based. So in the case of capital investment, particularly in property, is what you want. So if you tax that, you get less of it. Land, on the other hand, is something you want to tax more because it is the consumption of land that you don't want. In other words, the excess consumption of land. The utilization of land in low-intensity uses like parking lots or vacant land. So what happens in our tax structure, we have a set of adverse incentives because both are taxed at the same rate. So if you invest in property, you put capital in property, your taxes go up. If you speculate on land, you buy land, let it vacant, waiting for the land values to rise, you get a windfall. Now that's not socially productive. So you see what happens, if you change the incentives so that you disincentivize the holding of land and you incentivize the investment in buildings, this is what you will achieve by a land value tax.
Incentivize. What does that mean? It encourages me to behave a certain way. It's an incentive.
That's an incentive, and that's what they call it incentive taxation sometimes, where you incentivize the property tax by shifting the bulk of the tax rate onto the land, which means you're taxing speculation, basically. And also you're keeping that price inflation in check because it's the location value, the land value, that rises up in a speculative way. That's what caused the housing bubble, was that land inflation. The land value inflation. So if you tax that, you keep that bubble from building up too rapidly.
What about the idea that land should be considered a commons, like air and water? I think Native Americans didn't own land.
Yeah, they could use land for themselves in a certain social structure.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a lot of common land. You think of all our roads and our parks and our national forests and so on. There's the vast majority of land is commonly owned.
Sure.
And that's how we have the flow of goods and communication and electricity and water that we need to exist on our own private piece of land. If we didn't have the roads in between, we wouldn't have any commerce.
Well, I don't think it makes much common sense to me to own land that I'm occupying to raise my family and have a roof over my head.
But if
Perhaps I could have a permission or a lease, a lifetime lease, as I'm occupying it and using it, and it revert to the state when I pass away or something. But to own land and pass it on from generation to generation, that just perpetuates the monopoly capitalistic system, I think.
Right, and if we had a much stronger taxation of land ownership, then that would encourage just what you're saying, that this huge amount of capital wouldn't be sunk into land and speculated on and be the basis of making money. So if, for example, we've had probably in the last 20 years an average of about 8% a year appreciation of land value. So if we taxed land at 8%, then prices of land ownership would be steady, and you wouldn't have people making money on their private ownership of land. So that's much more in the commonwealth idea or commonwealth attitude.
It keeps housing more affordable as well. If you keep from runaway inflation, which is what we saw prior to 2008, and we're beginning to see again, it makes housing much more affordable. This is actually evidenced in Pennsylvania, where land value taxation is in effect. Pittsburgh had the system of land value tax for a long time, and it had some of the highest rate of housing production and then the most affordable housing in the country. Now, you talk about land ownership.
Okay.
You're looking at the example of China and Hong Kong, where land is not owned by through fee simple, as it is in this country and Western Europe. It's owned by the state, but the right to construct is what is transferable and is for sale. So what happens is that the state, when land is transferred, captures a certain portion of that increased value of land that even is projected into the future. So the land lease in Hong Kong is 50 years. The land lease in China is 70 years. So you don't own the land for that period of time.
How is that system working?
Well, in Hong Kong, it works very well. In China, it's a problem. It's not because of the ownership problem. It's because, well, it's another issue, but in China, they don't have property tax. This is a good reason for a property tax, because property tax is collected annually. Every year, your property is valued and assessed, and you're taxed on the basis of that. Now, we would say tax on the basis of land rent, which is the growth in land values. But in China, they don't have property tax, which means that the state, or that is local governments, have to collect land and sell it to developers in order to get the income they need to run their local government. Because they collect the income from the sale once on the sale, but after that they can't collect anything. So what that means, I have to keep accumulating land in order to sell it. to developers. Well, this is an adverse system, because how far can you go into the future before you run out of land? Well, they already know this, so what they do is they start expropriating land.
Expropriating, say a few more words about that.
Yeah, well, they're taking land from farmers that are on the fringes of urban areas where they're going to expand. Well, they just take that for next to nothing, because the rules about compensation are rather loosely interpreted in the government's favor. And so people who own, the farmers, by the way, do own land. But when they sell to the government, they sell at a very low price. The government turns around, sells it at a high price to developers. That's how they make their money. This is not very fair.
Are you talking about some form of socialism? It doesn't sound like capitalism or communism. If our system is such that it uses common ground as an approach to taxation and all the other things we're talking about now, would that be a socialistic idea or capitalistic idea or what?
If land is owned by government, you can call that socialistic. We don't have that in this country, but we have a property tax. The property tax could serve the same function. You don't need to have government ownership of land. In fact, it was Henry George argued vociferously with Karl Marx, who was talking about government ownership of the means of production and land. He said, you don't need to do that. All you need to do is tax it.
But you would still need roads and rights of way and all that.
Public land, of course.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think of it as pieces of both. So, for example, we promote not taxing capital, not taxing labor, and that's a combination of promoting capitalism and socialism. But we promote the taxation of private ownership of land to give the incentive to use land in as efficient a way as possible. So if we were to tax land a healthy amount, there wouldn't be so many, like Tom said, wouldn't be so many vacant lots, underutilized properties. And if we did that in Oregon, for example, the pressure on the urban growth boundary to expand would be lessened because you'd have a lot more efficient use of land toward the urban centers.
So you think it'd be better if we were to tax land more than we tax land now in Oregon?
Right.
Yes, but you lower the rate on the improvements at the same time. So you do this in a revenue neutral way. Altogether, you come out with the same revenue.
How does what you're talking about affect the super rich, the ruling elite, the people who have all the money, who control the government and can control the operation of our system?
Well, I'll answer your question. You have to look at the current system that we have in Oregon, which favors landowners whose property is high value and punishes those whose property is low value. That means the poor are paying more than the wealthy. Now, why does that happen? It's because of Measure 50. Measure 50 was passed along with Measure 5, 1993, as a way to control government spending and the collection of tax revenues from the property tax. But it was a misguided approach, because what happened is that because the assessments under Measure 50 are limited to 3% growth annually, that means properties which are rapidly increasing are pulling away from their assessed value at a high rate, but their assessed value is what they pay taxes on. That is that limited assessment. So there's a big gap. You probably read some of these reports that come out lately from the City Club as one. Northwest Economic Research Center came out with another one, another report that talked about these inequities. We did, my partner and I, we did a study. That's what I've been doing, by the way, is these studies on land value taxation effects. We did a study in Salem that showed the very same thing. The properties in the downtown area of Salem, and particularly underdeveloped and parking lots, are getting off at a paying lower taxes than they would if it weren't for Measure 50. And those in the neighborhoods, particularly in residential areas, in modest housing, which doesn't grow at a very high rate, they're the ones who have to absorb that tax shift from the wealthy landowners to the poorer landowners. So that's how it's inequitable in this state.
Okay.
And the folks with more money are the ones that tend to have excess land. And they're seeing their land go up at about 8% a year. And so eventually they can sell it for a lot more money. So if we had a substantial tax on land, then the poor could afford it. If you have a substantial tax, it brings down the price. So the poor can afford to buy land for themselves and have a stake in society instead of renting all their lives.
Okay, time is running out. The topic of today's show is economic justice. What do you think would make for a more just economy overall?
Well, some of the things we've been talking about.
Yeah. One thing that we need to do is this next legislative session is going to come up next year.
In Salem?
In Salem, the governor's already talking about tax reforms, and we need to pursue that. Our organization has been actively lobbying in the state legislature for legislation promoting land value taxation in 2 different forms. And we're going to be doubling our efforts next session because there's a good chance that we may get something passed. Ours is not the only organization that is advocating the reform of the property tax system and the, let us say, the overthrow of Measure 5 and 50, or the replacement of Measure 5 and 50 with a local option. Land value tax is what we're promoting.
How about the legislators in Salem, the Democrats and Republicans? How do they come down on your thinking and what you're talking about?
It's interesting because we have had a positive response from both Republicans and Democrats. And you know what the reason is? The Democrats, you might say, if you want to generalize, the Democrats will say, yes, this is more equitable, much more equitable than the system we have now, because it incentivizes and it's incentivized development. It makes housing more affordable. It rewards investment in property and discourages land speculation. That's progressive. The Republicans like it because it's pro-growth, it's pro-development. You see? Because
There's
it encourages...
That seems kind of funny to find both parties feeling similarly about something as radical an idea as what you're talking about.
Well, that's what we want to see, and it might be the right time to do this with the pressure to change our property tax system in Oregon.
I'm aware of the time. We're running out of time very fast. I want you to say something to the viewers that will be of value in what we've been talking about so far. Your final message to the viewers, and which camera are we going to have you look at? Number 3, what happened? I can't see your light. There. Talk to the viewers in camera 3.
Well, I would just say don't be afraid of economics. Spend a little time and do a little research and find out a little more about what's going on economically in the world and in your local place.
And how about you, Tom?
I would say look forward to the next legislative session and Think about the property tax as how central it is to economic justice. Because the property tax is the only tax that deals with land, labor, and capital, all three in a incentivized, productive way.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for coming on.
A pleasure.
And a few PSAs before we sign off. Thank you for coming on. You were delightful in many ways. Yes. PSAs, let's talk about some stuff that we want the viewers to know about. To watch my shows on the web, Google Don Baham YouTube. There's a whole plethora of older shows on there and even more recent ones. And the ACLU, that's a favorite organization of mine. Without the American Civil Liberties Union, our civil liberties would be down the tubes further than they are. And we need to amend the Constitution to do something about the Citizens United decision and the McCutcheon decision that is in the same vein. Go to, I got to tell you about humanists and humanism. Go to the www.theamericanhumanistsociation.org and you'll learn more about why Jeff and I are humanists. And to learn more about the Alliance for Democracy, that's a great organization, that's national, and we work on political and social issues. There's a national website, and the website for the Portland chapter. And my friend David Delk in the Alliance for Democracy Portland chapter has the Populist Dialogues. That's a half-hour interview show that he does regularly, and there's the website there. You click on AFD videos to see some of his interviews of people that are pretty interesting and important. Oh, and KFC, I got to tell you about KFC again. Kind, friendly, and charitable, not Kentucky Fried Chicken. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable to you too. And you too, Jeff, and you too, Tom, and you too, Guru. And thanks again.